Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd find myself in a standoff with a neighbor who built an illegal bridge onto my property, leading to a dramatic confrontation that would change everything. But that's exactly what happened when Diana Cooper, the self-proclaimed community organizer of Oakridge Valley, decided my family's generations-old maple farm was the perfect spot for her grand neighborhood improvement project. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Thomas Anderson, and until 6 months ago, my life revolved around running our family's historic maple syrup farm in Maine's peaceful countryside. The 50-acre property had been in my family for 4 generations, passed down from my great-grandfather, who started tapping maple trees here in 1923. The old farmhouse, weathered but sturdy, stood proudly on a gentle slope overlooking rows of ancient maple trees, their branches creating a natural canopy that turned golden in autumn. I'd taken over the farm 5 years ago when my father retired, modernizing our syrup production while maintaining the traditional techniques that made our products special. We weren't just any maple farm. We were known throughout New England for our artisanal syrup varieties and sustainable farming practices. The property's unique location, bordered by a scenic stream on one side and rolling hills on the other, made it not just productive, but breathtakingly beautiful. But running a maple farm isn't easy in today's world. Between changing weather patterns, affecting sap production, and increasing pressure from large commercial operations, I found myself working longer hours just to keep up. Still, I loved every minute of it. There was something deeply satisfying about continuing my family's legacy, about knowing every tree on our land, about producing something pure and natural that brought joy to others. The trouble began when our quiet corner of Maine started attracting wealthy out-of-towners looking for their slice of rural paradise. New developments sprouted up around us like mushrooms after rain, and suddenly our once isolated farm found itself surrounded by luxury homes and their occupants who viewed our working farm as either a quaint attraction or an inconvenience to their pastoral fantasies. Diana Cooper arrived last spring, purchasing the largest property adjacent to ours. She immediately made her presence known, hosting elaborate garden parties and appointing herself the unofficial mayor of our newly developed community. At first, I paid little attention to her social climbing and community planning meetings. The farm kept me busy enough, and as long as she stayed on her side of the property line, I had no reason to care about her activities. Then came that fateful morning in early summer when I discovered construction materials piled near our stream boundary. Wooden planks, concrete blocks, and steel supports had appeared overnight, along with survey stakes marking out what looked suspiciously like a pathway onto our land. I couldn't believe my eyes. Someone was actually planning to build a structure that would cross the stream and connect directly to our property. I immediately called the town office, only to discover that Diana had already been there, presenting what she called a community access initiative that would open up the historic maple farm experience to all residents. She had somehow convinced several council members that creating a bridge access point to our farm would benefit the entire community, despite never once discussing this with me, the actual property owner. That discovery was just the beginning. What followed was a series of events that would test not just my patience, but my entire understanding of property rights, community politics, and human nature. I had no idea that standing up for my family's land would thrust me into a battle that would involve the police, the town council, and eventually the entire community. Looking back now, I realize that first pile of construction materials was like a declaration of war, Diana Cooper's way of announcing that she intended to remake our quiet corner of Maine in her own image, regardless of who or what stood in her way. But she hadn't counted on one thing: This land wasn't just property to me. It was my heritage, my livelihood, and my responsibility to protect. And I wasn't about to let anyone, especially not a self-important newcomer with grand plans, take that away from me. Little did I know that this was just the first skirmish in a battle that would escalate far beyond anything I could have imagined, ultimately leading to one of the most dramatic confrontations our small town had ever seen. The decision to confront Diana Cooper about the construction materials came easier than I expected. Years of managing our family's maple farm had taught me that problems don't solve themselves. You either face them head-on or watch them grow until they're unmanageable. So, the morning after discovering those ominous piles of building supplies, I made my way along the stream boundary to her property. Diana's estate was everything our modest farmhouse wasn't, a sprawling modern mansion, with floor-to-ceiling windows and perfectly manicured lawns that looked more like a luxury resort than a home. Security cameras tracked my approach as I walked up the winding driveway, making me feel like an intruder, despite being a fourth-generation resident of this land. I found her in what she called her garden pavilion, a glass-enclosed structure that probably cost more than 5 years of my maple syrup production. She was surrounded by several well-dressed people who I recognized as members of her newly formed Oakridge Valley Enhancement Committee. They fell silent as I entered, their expressions suggesting I was interrupting something important. "Thomas," Diana said, rising from her designer chair with practiced grace. "What an unexpected pleasure. We were just discussing the exciting new developments planned for our community." Her smile was perfect, practiced, and didn't reach her eyes. "Would you like some artisanal coffee? It's imported from a small plantation in Costa Rica. I'm here about the construction materials by the stream," I said, declining her offer with a shake of my head. "They're on my property line, and I want to know what you're planning." Diana's smile widened as she gestured to a series of architectural renderings spread across a glass table. "Oh, wonderful. I was going to contact you about this. We're creating what we call the Heritage Bridge Project, a beautiful covered bridge that will connect our properties and allow the community to experience your charming maple farm up close." The casualness with which she presented this invasion of my property left me momentarily speechless. The renderings showed an elaborate wooden bridge, complete with decorative lighting and informational plaques, cutting straight across the stream onto my land. What was even more shocking were the additional pathways marked out through my maple grove, creating what appeared to be a self-guided tour route. "This isn't happening," I said firmly, my hands clenched at my sides. "That's private property. My property. You can't just build bridges onto it without permission." "Thomas," Diana sighed as if explaining something to a child, "you need to understand that times are changing. Oakridge Valley is growing, and we need to adapt. Your maple farm is a vital part of our local heritage, and the community deserves access to it. The bridge project will bring in tourists, increase property values, and put our town on the map." "The community?" I echoed incredulously. "You mean your wealthy friends who moved here last year? This isn't about the community. It's about you trying to turn my working farm into your personal tourist attraction." One of the committee members, a man in an expensive-looking suit, cleared his throat. "Mr. Anderson, we've already secured preliminary approval from the Town Planning Board. This project is going forward whether you like it or not. We're merely informing you as a courtesy." That was when I realized just how carefully Diana had orchestrated this. She'd been planning this for months, working behind the scenes, gathering supporters, and manipulating local officials. The construction materials weren't the beginning of the problem. They were just the first visible sign of a much larger scheme. "Let me be absolutely clear," I said, my voice steady despite my rising anger. "If you try to build that bridge, I'll fight you every step of the way." I'll get lawyers involved. I'll appeal to the state if I have to, but you are not turning my family's farm into your personal playground." Diana's perfect smile never wavered, but her eyes turned cold. "Don't be difficult, Thomas. Progress is inevitable. You can either be part of it and benefit, or you can resist and," she paused meaningfully, "face the consequences." As I walked back to my farm, my mind was racing. The threat in Diana's words was clear, but so was her miscalculation. She thought she was dealing with a simple farmer who would be intimidated by her money and connections. She didn't understand that this land represented something far more valuable to me than any dollar amount she could offer. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by property documents, deed records, and local ordinances. If Diana Cooper wanted a fight, she was going to get one. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against and prepare for what I knew would be a lengthy battle. Looking out my window at the sunset, reflecting off the stream where Diana planned to build her bridge, I made a silent promise to my great-grandfather and all the generations of my family who had worked this land. No matter what it took, I would protect our legacy from those who sought to exploit it for their own gain. Little did I know that Diana Cooper's Heritage Bridge project was just the beginning of a conflict that would test not only my resolve, but the very fabric of our rural community. The next few weeks settled into an uneasy rhythm as I focused on establishing my position and reinforcing my property boundaries. The first thing I did was contact James Sullivan, a local surveyor who'd worked with my family for years, to officially mark out our property lines. His precise measurements confirmed what I already knew. Diana Cooper's planned bridge would cut directly across my land without any legal right-of-way. Early morning fog still clung to the maple grove as I walked the property with James, marking boundaries with bright orange stakes and documenting everything with photographs and GPS coordinates. The stream gurgled peacefully, a stark contrast to the tension that now surrounded it. James shook his head as we examined the spot where Diana had stockpiled her construction materials. "Never seen anything quite like this, Thomas," he said, making careful notes in his weathered logbook. "She's got no easement, no right-of-way, nothing that would give her any legal authority to build here. But word around town is she's been making some powerful friends on the council." I nodded grimly. "That's why I need everything documented." "Oh, perfectly. This can't come down to her word against mine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After James left, I spent the rest of the morning installing security cameras at strategic points along the stream boundary. It wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing on our family farm, but Diana's veiled threats had made it clear that I needed to protect myself. The cameras were simple but effective, their lenses focused on the proposed bridge site and the surrounding area. My next step was reinforcing the physical boundaries. I hired local contractors to install sturdy posts along the stream bank, connected by heavy-duty cables that would make it impossible for anyone to accidentally start construction without physically removing them first. The work took 3 days, during which time I noticed several of Diana's associates driving slowly past the property, taking photos and making notes. The farm itself demanded attention too. It was early autumn, and the maple trees were beginning to show their first hints of color. Despite the growing conflict with Diana, I had to maintain my regular operations. The syrup production facility needed cleaning and maintenance before the next season, and there were always repairs to be made to the collection lines that ran between the trees. Working among the maples brought me a sense of peace that had been missing since this whole situation began. These trees had witnessed 4 generations of my family's hard work, and their quiet strength reminded me of what I was fighting for. Each tap, each line, each bucket represented not just our livelihood, but our heritage. One crisp morning, as I was checking the lines nearest to the stream, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Small surveyors' flags had appeared overnight, marking out what looked like a path through my maple grove. They created a neat line from where Diana's bridge would connect, cutting through some of our oldest and most productive trees. I immediately started photographing and documenting the flag's locations. This was a clear escalation. Not only was Diana planning to build her bridge, but she was already mapping out routes through my property without any permission or legal right. As I worked, I heard the distinctive sound of expensive tires on gravel. Diana's black SUV had pulled up to the property line. She stepped out, dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a visit to a working farm. "Good morning, Thomas. I see you found our preliminary trail markers. The landscape architects are very excited about creating an authentic maple farm experience for visitors." "These markers are trespassing," I replied firmly, holding up my camera. "Just like your bridge would be. I'm documenting everything, Diana. Every flag, every marker, every violation of my property rights." She smiled, that practiced smile of hers. "Oh, Thomas, you're making this so much harder than it needs to be. The town council is very supportive of our heritage tourism initiative. Fighting this will only cost you money you can't afford to spend and goodwill you can't afford to lose." "My family has been here for 4 generations, I said, my voice steady. "We've survived droughts, economic downturns, and plenty of people who thought they could push us around. We're still here, and we'll still be here long after your heritage tourism initiative is forgotten." Diana's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We'll see about that," she said, turning back to her vehicle. "Change is coming to Oakridge Valley, Thomas. Don't get caught on the wrong side of progress." As I watched her drive away, I began carefully, removing the survey flags, documenting each one's location before pulling it up. The sun was setting by the time I finished, casting long shadows through the maple grove. Standing there, surrounded by the trees my great-grandfather had planted, I felt more certain than ever that I was doing the right thing. But Diana's words echoed in my mind. She was right about one thing. I couldn't afford a lengthy legal battle. I needed to be smart about this, to find a way to protect my land without draining my resources. As darkness fell over the farm, I began formulating a plan that would require careful timing and even more careful documentation of every move Diana Cooper made. Little did I know that the next morning would bring a development that would force both of our hands and turn this quiet property dispute into something far more dramatic. The sound of heavy machinery jolted me awake at dawn. For a moment, I lay in bed, hoping it was just a passing construction vehicle on the main road, but the steady rumble was too close, too persistent. Throwing on my work clothes, I rushed outside, my heart pounding as I followed the noise to the stream boundary. What I saw there made my blood run cold. 2 large excavators were already at work on Diana's side of the stream, clearing trees and preparing the ground for what could only be the bridge foundation. A team of workers in reflective vests moved purposefully around the site, taking measurements and marking positions with spray paint. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She hadn't just started construction, she'd launched a full-scale operation under the cover of dawn. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and started recording. The morning mist still hung over the stream, creating an almost surreal scene as the machines tore into the earth. One of the workers spotted me and quickly spoke into a radio. Within minutes, Diana Cooper emerged from a white construction trailer that had somehow appeared overnight, clipboard in hand, and wearing a hard hat that looked like it had never seen actual use. "Good morning, Thomas," she called out, her voice carrying across the stream with false cheerfulness. "I hope we didn't wake you too early. We're trying to stay on schedule with the Heritage Bridge project." "This is illegal," I shouted back, continuing to record. "You have no permits, no easements, and no right to build on my property." Diana's smile never wavered as she approached the stream bank. "Actually, we have all the necessary approvals from the town council. Would you like to see them?" She held up her clipboard triumphantly. I immediately called the police, keeping my phone camera trained on the construction site as I spoke with the dispatcher. While waiting for them to arrive, I documented everything: the equipment, the workers, the markings they were making, and especially the fact that they were already extending their work onto my side of the stream. Within 20 minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up my driveway. Officer Mike Reynolds, whom I'd known since high school, stepped out first, followed by a younger officer I didn't recognize. Diana immediately strode over to meet them, her clipboard at the ready. "Officers, I'm so glad you're here," she began, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "Mr. Anderson seems to be having trouble accepting the town council's decision regarding our community improvement project." Officer Reynolds, to his credit, maintained a professional demeanor. "Ma'am, we need to see all permits and approvals for this construction, especially anything involving Mr. Anderson's property." Diana proudly presented her clipboard, pointing to various signatures and stamps. I moved closer, my own property documents in hand, ready to show the clear boundary lines and lack of easements. But as I looked over Diana's shoulder at her paperwork, something caught my eye. "That's not the current property line," I said, pointing to the survey map she was showing. "And that signature, that's supposedly from my father, dated last month. My father passed away 2 years ago." The younger officer's eyebrows shot up, and even Diana's perfect composure slipped for a moment. Officer Reynolds took both sets of documents and compared them carefully. "Ma'am," he said finally, "these permits appear to have some serious discrepancies, and regardless of town council approval, you can't begin construction that extends onto private property without the owner's consent or a court order." Diana's smile turned cold. "This is a simple misunderstanding. My lawyers can clear this up with a phone call." "Until they do," Officer Reynolds replied, "all construction needs to stop immediately. These machines need to be moved back onto your property, and any work that's been done on Mr. Anderson's land needs to be documented." Diana's mask of politeness finally cracked. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I've invested considerable resources in this project. The town council fully supports what we're doing here. One phone call from me, Officer Reynolds interrupted calmly, "and we'll have the State Environmental Protection Agency out here to examine these unauthorized excavations next to a water source. Your choice, Ms. Cooper." For the first time since this conflict began, I saw real anger flash across Diana's face. She turned to the construction crew and snapped orders to shut down the equipment. As the machines fell silent, she faced me with an expression that would have withered lesser men. "This isn't over, Thomas," she said quietly, so only I could hear. "You have no idea what you're up against. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd taken my original offer." As Diana stormed back to her construction trailer, Officer Reynolds pulled me aside. "Thomas, you need to file for a formal cease and desist order immediately, and get those documents she showed us to a lawyer. That forged signature is a serious matter." I nodded, watching as the construction crew began packing up their equipment. This morning's events had changed everything. What had started as a property dispute had now escalated into something far more serious and dangerous. Diana Cooper had shown she was willing to forge documents and bulldoze her way onto my land. I knew that stopping her construction today was only the beginning of what would become an even bigger battle. As the police cars pulled away and the last of the construction equipment retreated to Diana's side of the stream, I stood alone on my property, the morning sun finally burning. Away the mist. The scattered tools and disturbed earth were like wounds on the landscape, but they were nothing compared to what could have happened if I hadn't caught this in time. I pulled out my phone and began making calls. It was time to find a lawyer who could help me fight back against Diana Cooper and whatever she planned to throw at me next. The next morning, still reeling from the construction incident, I found myself sitting in the office of Jennifer Hayes, one of the most respected property lawyers in the county. Her office was modest but professional, with walls lined with legal texts and windows overlooking the town's historic main street. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could see the town council building from where I sat. "So," Jennifer said, reviewing the photos and videos I'd taken, "Diana Cooper tried to start construction at dawn with falsified documents, including a forged signature from your deceased father." She shook her head, her expression darkening. "This is more than just a property dispute, Mr. Anderson. We're looking at potential criminal charges." I shifted in my chair, both relieved and anxious to have professional confirmation of the severity of the situation. "She has the town council in her pocket," I explained. "She keeps talking about their support for her Heritage Bridge project, like it gives her the right to do whatever she wants." Jennifer's fingers flew across her keyboard as she took notes. "Town council support doesn't override property rights or state law. And forgery is forgery, regardless of who's backing her project." She paused, looking at me directly. "But I should warn you, people like Diana Cooper don't back down easily. This is going to get worse before it gets better." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a news alert from the local paper. My heart sank as I read the headline, "Local farmer blocks community development project, threatens jobs and tourism." The article was a masterpiece of subtle character assassination, painting me as an obstinate remnant of the past, standing in the way of progress and community growth. Jennifer read the article over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. "She works. Vast, I'll give her that. But this kind of media manipulation can backfire if we play it right." She turned back to her computer and began typing again. "First things first. We need to file for an emergency injunction to prevent any further construction attempts. Then we'll prepare a cease and desist order regarding the false documents." As Jennifer worked, I found myself staring out her window at the town I'd known all my life. Oakridge Valley had always been a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else. But Diana Cooper's arrival had changed something fundamental about the place, creating divisions and tensions that hadn't existed before. "There's something else you should know," I said, turning back to Jennifer. "Yesterday, while the police were there, Diana threatened me. She said I had no idea what I was up against, and that I'd wish I'd taken her original offer." Jennifer's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. "Did the police hear this threat?" "No." She made sure to say it quietly, just to me. "Classic intimidation tactic," Jennifer muttered, making another note. "We'll document it, but without witnesses, it's your word against hers." "Did your security cameras pick up any audio?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my neighbor, Bill Henderson. "You might want to check your property line near the old sugar shack. Something's not right." I showed the message to Jennifer, who immediately stood up. "Go now. Document everything you find. I'll have the injunction paperwork filed within the hour." The drive back to my farm took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. As I approached the sugar shack, an old building where my grandfather had first started processing maple syrup, I saw what had prompted Bill's message. A team of surveyors was working along my property line, placing new markers that were definitely not where they should be. I parked my truck and walked over. Phone already recording. The surveyors wore uniforms from Cooper Development Services, obviously Diana's people. They barely glanced at me as I approached. "This is private property," I called out. "You need to leave immediately." The lead surveyor, a middle-aged man with graying hair, finally looked up. "We're conducting an official survey at the request of Ms. Cooper. There seems to be some discrepancy in the property lines. The property lines have been established for over a century, I said, my voice steady despite my rising anger. You're trespassing. Actually, came Diana's voice from behind me, we've uncovered some interesting historical documents that suggest otherwise. It seems the original property boundaries were never properly recorded. We're simply conducting a professional survey to clarify things. I turned to face her. She stood there in expensive hiking boots that had clearly never seen real use, holding another clipboard full of what I was certain were more questionable documents. This is harassment, I said firmly. My lawyer is filing an injunction as we speak. These surveyors need to leave now. Diana's smile was sharp as a blade. Your lawyer? How quaint. I have an entire legal team, Thomas. And they're very good at finding historical irregularities in property records. This could get very expensive for you very quickly. As we stood there in the shadow of my family's old sugar shack, the line between past and present seemed to blur. This building had witnessed nearly 100 years of my family's history, and now here was Diana Cooper, trying to literally redraw the boundaries of everything we'd built. Get your surveyors off my land, I said quietly, or I'll call the police again. Diana's expression hardened, but she gestured to the survey team to pack up. As they retreated, she lingered for a moment. You know, Thomas, there are easier ways to resolve this. My offer still stands, for now, but every day you resist, the price of fighting me goes up. I watched her walk away, her threats hanging in the air like storm clouds. Pulling out my phone, I called Jennifer to update her on this latest development. The battle lines were being drawn, literally and figuratively, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The following days brought a flurry of legal activity and mounting pressure. Jennifer Hayes moved quickly, filing not only the injunction against further construction attempts, but also a formal complaint about the forged documents. Meanwhile, Diana Cooper's influence in town seemed to grow by the hour. Everywhere I went, I could feel the weight of disapproving stares and whispered conversations. The local coffee shop, where I'd been getting my morning coffee for years, suddenly had a new sign in the window supporting the Heritage Bridge project. The hardware store owner, who'd always given me friendly discounts, now could barely meet my eyes when I came in for supplies. It was as if Diana had managed to turn the entire town against me without lifting a finger. But the real shock came when I received notice of an emergency town council meeting. The agenda included a discussion of historical easements and public access rights regarding my property. Jennifer advised me to attend, but cautioned me to keep my cool, no matter what was said. The meeting room was packed when I arrived. Diana sat in the front row, surrounded by her usual entourage of supporters, all wearing matching Preserve Our Heritage buttons. I took a seat near the back, noticing how people shifted uncomfortably, away from me, as if property disputes were contagious. Mayor Richardson, a man I'd known since childhood, called the meeting to order. Tonight's main agenda item concerns the proposed Heritage Bridge project and the historical public access rights to the Anderson Maple Farm property. Diana stood up, smooth and polished in an expensive suit. Thank you, Mayor. I've brought some very interesting historical documents to share with the council. She began distributing folders to the council members. These records from the 1800s suggest that the original land grant included provisions for public access and community use. I felt my blood pressure rising as she continued. Furthermore, our research indicates that the stream boundary was never properly surveyed when the property was divided. The original markers suggest that the public access corridor actually extends several feet onto what Mr. Anderson claims as his private property. Jennifer, who sat beside me taking rapid notes, whispered, "Don't react. Let her dig herself deeper." Diana's presentation continued, each claim more outrageous than the last. According to her research, my family's property had historically been a community gathering place, and the current private ownership was merely a recent misunderstanding of the original land agreements. When she finally finished, Mayor Richardson looked troubled. "These are serious claims, Ms. Cooper. Mr. Anderson, would you like to respond?" I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. Yes, I would. I pulled out my own folder of documents. First, I'd like to point out that Ms. Cooper's supposed historical documents conveniently appeared right after her illegal construction attempt was stopped by the police. Second, I have here the original deed to the property, registered in 1923, which clearly shows the current boundaries. I started passing out copies of my documents. I also have survey records from every decade since then, all showing the same property lines. But most importantly, I paused, making eye contact with each council member, I have proof that Ms. Cooper attempted to forge my deceased father's signature on construction permits just days ago. A murmur ran through the crowd. Diana's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. "These are serious allegations," Mayor Richardson said, frowning. "They're not allegations," Jennifer spoke up, standing beside me. "We've filed formal complaints with both the county clerk's office and the state attorney general. The forgery is documented and verifiable." Diana's lawyer, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, immediately jumped to his feet. "These accusations are defamatory and completely unfounded. Ms. Cooper is simply trying to restore historical access to a community landmark." "By forging dead people's signatures?" I countered, my voice steady but firm. "By attempting illegal construction at dawn, by harassing me with false surveys." The room erupted in heated discussions. I could see some council members examining the documents closely, while others whispered among themselves. Diana sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that was almost unnerving. Mayor Richardson finally called for order. "This is clearly a more complex issue than initially presented. I move that we table any decisions regarding historical easements until these legal matters can be properly investigated." Diana's lawyer protested, but the motion passed. As the meeting adjourned, I watched Diana gather her supporters around her like a shield. But before she left, she caught my eye and mouthed two words: "Bad move." Outside in the parking lot, Jennifer was cautiously optimistic. "You handled that well. The forgery evidence clearly rattled them. But Diana Cooper isn't going to take this lying down. She's going to retaliate, and it's going to be personal." I nodded, watching Diana's group exit the building. They moved like a coordinated unit, already huddled in discussion, probably planning their next move. What should I expect? "Anything and everything," Jennifer replied grimly. "She's got resources and connections, and you just publicly embarrassed her. Document everything, keep your security cameras running, and don't let your guard down for a second." As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this victory, small as it was, would come with a price. Diana Cooper had shown she was willing to forge documents and manipulate the entire town. What else was she capable of when backed into a corner? The answer to that question would come sooner than I expected, and in a way that would change the entire nature of our conflict. The retaliation began at dawn the next day. I woke to the sound of cars, lots of them, pulling up along the road that bordered my property. Looking out my bedroom window, I saw a line of vehicles stretching down the street, and people setting up what looked like a protest camp, complete with signs and folding chairs. Diana Cooper stood in the midst of it all, directing her followers like a conductor leading an orchestra. The signs they carried made my heart sink. "Save our heritage," "Public access now," "Stop Anderson's greed," and most infuriating of all, "This land belongs to everyone." I immediately called Jennifer, who answered despite the early hour. "They're on public property," she said after I described the scene. "As long as they don't cross onto your land, there's not much we can do about it. Document everything, but don't engage." Following her advice, I set up my phone to record and went about my morning routine, trying to ignore the growing crowd. But Diana had planned this carefully. As I attempted to drive my truck out to check on the far maple groves, I found the road effectively blocked by concerned citizens who just happened to be crossing back and forth continuously. "Sorry, Mr. Anderson," one woman said with false sweetness. "We're just exercising our right to peaceful assembly. You might have to wait a few minutes." Those few minutes stretched into nearly an hour before I could finally maneuver my truck through. But the protest was just the beginning. By mid-morning, local news vans had arrived, their cameras eagerly capturing the scene. Diana, perfectly dressed and camera-ready, gave interviews painting herself as a community advocate fighting against a stubborn landowner who wanted to deny the public their historical rights to access the property. "The Anderson farm has always been part of our community's heritage," she told one reporter, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. "My research has uncovered documentation showing that this land was meant to be shared. Mr. Anderson's family may have been caretakers, but they were never meant to have exclusive rights." I watched the interview from my porch, my hands clenched into fists. Every word was carefully crafted to make me sound like a villain, while positioning herself as a noble defender of community interests. The reporters ate it up, barely questioning her claims or asking for evidence. Around noon, Jennifer arrived, pushing through the crowd with determined strides. "This is a classic pressure campaign," she said, as we sat in my kitchen watching the circus outside. "She's trying to force you to back down by turning public opinion against you. But she's also getting desperate. People who forge documents and then stage protests usually are." "What's our next move?" I asked, watching as more protesters arrived, many carrying lunch coolers and camping chairs. They were settling in for the long haul. "We push back, but strategically," Jennifer replied, pulling out her laptop. "I've been doing some digging into Diana Cooper's background, and I found something interesting. This isn't the first time she's pulled something like this." She showed me newspaper articles from 3 different towns where Diana had been involved in similar community development projects. In each case, she had used public sentiment and carefully manipulated local politics to force property owners to sell or grant access rights. "The pattern is always the same," Jennifer explained. "She finds a property she wants, creates a controversy around public access or historical rights, and then pressures the owners until they give in. But here's the interesting part. In each case, once she got control, the property was quickly rezoned and developed for commercial use." The realization hit me hard. This isn't about heritage or public access at all, is it? She wants my land for development. Jennifer nodded grimly. "The Maple Farm is just a cover story. Once she gets control of the property, I guarantee those plans for a heritage bridge will mysteriously transform into something much more profitable." As if to confirm our suspicions, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Anderson, I represent a development group interested in purchasing your property at a generous price. Ms. Cooper suggested I reach out. This situation could be resolved quickly and profitably for all parties." I showed the message to Jennifer, who quickly documented it. "Don't respond," she advised. "But this is good." She's showing her hand. "Keep recording everything, every protest, every interview, every message. We're building a pattern of harassment and manipulation that will be crucial when we take this to court." Outside, the protesters had started chanting, their voices carrying across my property, "Share the heritage, share the land." The irony of people who'd lived here less than a year, demanding access to land my family, had worked for generations, wasn't lost on me. As the sun began to set, the protest showed no signs of dispersing. If anything, it had grown larger, with people setting up battery-powered lights and even a small generator. Diana Cooper stood among them, her satisfied smile visible even from a distance as she watched my every move. "She's not going to stop," I said quietly, looking out at the crowd. This is just the beginning, isn't it? Jennifer's expression was serious as she packed up her files. No, she's not going to stop. But neither are we. Tomorrow, we start fighting back. Not just legally, but in the court of public opinion. It's time to show everyone who Diana Cooper really is and what she's really after. As I watched Jennifer drive away, carefully navigating through the crowd of protesters, I knew we were entering a new phase of this battle. Diana Cooper had brought the fight to my doorstep, but she was about to learn that some things, like family heritage and honest hard work, were worth defending at any cost. The morning after the protest began, Jennifer's strategy to fight back started taking shape. She had spent the night compiling evidence from Diana's previous community development projects, and what she uncovered was damning. In 3 different towns, Diana's heritage preservation campaigns had ended with historic properties being demolished for luxury condominiums and high-end retail spaces. "We need to get this information to the right people," Jennifer explained as we sat in my kitchen, the sounds of the continuing protest drifting through the windows. "But we have to be smart about it. Diana's got the local media in her pocket, so we'll go straight to the state level." While Jennifer worked her contacts, I had my own breakthrough. Bill Henderson, my neighbor who had warned me about the surveyors, came by through the back way to avoid the protesters. He worked at the county records office and had made an interesting discovery. "I found something odd in the property records," Bill said, spreading out papers on my kitchen table. "Remember those historical documents Diana presented at the council meeting? They're forgeries too, and not very good ones. The paper's wrong, the ink's wrong, and some of the referenced landmarks didn't even exist in the time period she claims they're from." This was exactly what we needed. Jennifer immediately began preparing documentation for the state authorities, while I focused on maintaining the farm's daily operations despite the circus outside. The protesters had settled into a routine, taking shifts to maintain their presence. 24/7, always watching, always ready with their cameras. If I made any move, they could twist into controversy. But Diana's campaign was about to hit an unexpected snag. That afternoon, as I was checking the security cameras Jennifer had advised me to install, I noticed something strange. The footage showed several of Diana's protesters sneaking onto my property late at night, not just trespassing, but actively tampering with my equipment and maple taps. "This is perfect," Jennifer said when I showed her the footage. "We can file criminal charges for vandalism and trespassing. More importantly, it shows their true colors. These aren't concerned citizens, they're hired troublemakers." We took the footage to Officer Reynolds, who reviewed it with growing concern. "This goes beyond civil dispute," he said, shaking his head. "This is criminal activity. We'll need to investigate." The police investigation added a new dimension to the conflict. When officers began interviewing the protesters, asking for identification and taking statements, the atmosphere changed. Some of the more casual participants, realizing they might be implicated in criminal activity, started drifting away. Diana, however, was ready with a counter-move. She called an impromptu press conference right there on the street, crying crocodile tears about police intimidation and attempts to silence peaceful protesters. But her performance was interrupted by an unexpected arrival. A state environmental inspector responding to an anonymous tip about unauthorized construction near a protected waterway. The inspector, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Martinez, took one look at the disturbed earth near the stream where Diana had attempted to start bridge construction and immediately began taking samples and photographs. "This is a protected watershed," she explained to the hovering news crews. "Any construction activity here requires extensive environmental impact studies and state-level permits." Diana tried to intervene, waving her folder of supposedly historical documents, but Martinez wasn't interested. "Ma'am, I don't care about historical easements. I care about environmental regulations, which appear to have been violated here." The news crews, sensing a shift in the story, began asking different questions. Instead of focusing on Diana's narrative about heritage access, they started inquiring about environmental permits, construction regulations, and the suspicious timing of document discoveries. By sunset, the protest crowd had thinned considerably. The presence of state officials and the possibility of criminal investigations had changed the calculus for many of Diana's supporters. Those who remained seemed less certain, their chants less enthusiastic. In my kitchen that evening, Jennifer helped me sort through the day's developments. "This is good," she said, organizing files of evidence. "The environmental angle could be what breaks this open. State agencies don't care about local politics or Diana's influence with the town council." "But it's not over," I noted, watching through the window as Diana huddled with her core group of supporters, gesturing animatedly. "No," Jennifer agreed. "In fact, this might make her more dangerous. She's invested too much in this project to back down now. We need to be prepared for her to escalate things even further." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another text from the unknown developer. "Final offer, triple market value for the property. After tomorrow, things get complicated." I showed the message to Jennifer, who documented it with our growing file of evidence. "Classic intimidation tactic," she said, "but they're getting sloppy. Every threat, every act of vandalism, every forged document just makes our case stronger." Looking out at the dwindling protest, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. We'd won this round, but Diana Cooper had shown she was willing to break the law to get what she wanted. The question now was, what would she do when she realized her usual tactics weren't working? The answer would come sooner than expected, and it would force me to defend not just my property rights, but my family's entire legacy. The next morning brought a new level of escalation that I never saw coming. As I headed out at dawn to check on the maple groves, I found construction equipment already positioned along Diana's side of the property line. Not just surveying tools this time, but heavy machinery, including a massive excavator and several dump trucks. Diana stood near the equipment, smartphone in hand, talking animatedly with a group of construction workers. When she saw me approaching, her practiced smile spread across her face. "Good morning, Thomas. I thought I'd get an early start today. We're beginning preliminary work for an environmental assessment, as required by the state." "Environmental assessment," I echoed, immediately pulling out my phone to record. "With heavy construction equipment. Oh, these?" She gestured casually at the machinery. "Standard procedure for soil testing and watershed analysis, all perfectly legal on my property." The emphasis she put on my property made my skin crawl. Before I could respond, the excavator's engine roared to life. To my horror, it began moving toward the stream boundary, its massive bucket extended. I immediately dialed Jennifer, then the police, keeping my camera trained on the scene the whole time. "Ms. Cooper," I called out over the engine noise, "any work that affects the watershed requires permits from the State Environmental Office. You know that." Diana's smile never wavered. "We have all necessary permits for preliminary testing. You'd like to see them?" She held up another of her endless clipboards filled with official-looking documents. The excavator was now dangerously close to the stream bank. Even from where I stood, I could see the soil beginning to crumble under its weight. If that machine damaged the streambed, it could affect the entire watershed that fed my maple grove. Officer Reynolds arrived first, lights flashing. He took one look at the situation and immediately called for backup. "Ms. Cooper," he announced. Through his cruiser's speaker, "cease all equipment operation immediately." Diana made a show of checking her papers. "Officer, I have permits for—" "Stop the machines now," Reynolds interrupted, "or I'll arrest every operator for reckless endangerment of a protected watershed." The excavator operator, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, shut down his machine. Other workers began stepping away from their equipment, nobody wanting to be the one to challenge the police. Jennifer arrived just as Sarah Martinez, the state environmental inspector, pulled up. Martinez took one look at the heavy equipment and started writing citations. "This is a direct violation of the cease and desist order," she declared. "Each piece of equipment present constitutes a separate violation." Diana's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous. I have rights to develop my property." "Your property rights end at the watershed boundary," Martinez replied coolly, continuing to write citations. "And these machines shouldn't be anywhere near this sensitive ecosystem without proper environmental impact studies and permits." As the situation unfolded, I noticed something disturbing. While everyone's attention was focused on the confrontation, by the stream, several of Diana's workers were quietly unloading something from one of the dump trucks, long sections of bridge support beams. I nudged Officer Reynolds and pointed it out. He immediately dispatched officers to investigate, but the workers quickly claimed they were just organizing their equipment. Jennifer pulled me aside as more police cars arrived. "She's getting desperate," she whispered. "This stunt with the heavy equipment, it's a distraction. She's trying to force the issue, make you look unreasonable for opposing standard environmental testing." The local news crews had started arriving, drawn by the police presence and the dramatic scene unfolding. Diana immediately shifted into performance mode, giving impromptu interviews about how she was being harassed for trying to conduct routine environmental studies. But her narrative was crumbling. The state environmental inspector's presence and the obvious violations were hard to explain away, even for someone as skilled at manipulation as Diana Cooper. When Martinez began explaining the violations to the news crews, specifically pointing out how the heavy equipment could damage the protected watershed, the story began to shift. As the morning wore on and the police finished documenting everything, Jennifer helped me assess the potential damage to the stream bank. "We'll add this to our case," she said grimly. "But Thomas, be careful. This kind of escalation shows she's getting desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." Looking at the deep tracks the excavator had left in the soil, some dangerously close to the stream, I felt my resolve strengthen. Diana Cooper wasn't just threatening my property rights anymore. She was threatening the very land that had sustained my family for generations. As if reading my thoughts, Jennifer added, "We need to be ready for whatever comes next. Someone willing to risk criminal charges and environmental violations isn't going to stop here." As I watched Diana Cooper drive away, already on her phone, presumably with her lawyers, I knew Jennifer was right. This was far from over, and the next confrontation would likely be even more dramatic. But I was ready. Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Diana's latest stunt with the heavy equipment had unexpected consequences. By the afternoon, state environmental officials had set up a temporary monitoring station near the stream, complete with testing equipment and cameras. Their presence effectively created a buffer zone between my property and Diana's continued attempts at encroachment. But while this new development provided some protection, it also meant increased scrutiny of my own farming operations. I spent hours with Inspector Martinez, reviewing our maple tapping procedures and watershed management practices. Fortunately, our traditional methods easily met environmental standards, something that would prove crucial in the days ahead. "Your family's been good stewards of this land," Martinez noted as we walked the property. "The stream's water quality is excellent, and your farming practices actually help maintain the local ecosystem. Mind if I document this? It could be relevant to any future hearings," I agreed, watching as she took detailed notes and photos. What I didn't realize at the time was that Diana Cooper was also watching, and she was about to change tactics entirely. The next morning, I received an official-looking letter from the State Agricultural Board. According to the document, someone had filed a complaint about potentially harmful agricultural practices at my farm. The letter demanded a full inspection and audit of our syrup production facility. Jennifer was furious when I showed her. "This is harassment, plain and simple," she said, examining the letter. "She's trying to drown you in regulatory compliance issues. The timing is too perfect to be coincidental." She was right. Within days, we received additional notices from various government agencies, health department inquiries, labor practice, investigations, even a tax audit notice. Each one required time, attention, and documentation to address. "She's trying to overwhelm you," Jennifer explained as we sorted through the growing pile of paperwork. "The goal is to make defending your property so burdensome that selling becomes the easier option." But Diana hadn't counted on one thing: my meticulous record-keeping. Years of running a family business had taught me the importance of maintaining detailed documentation. Every inspection, every permit, every tax record was carefully filed and up to date. The agricultural inspector arrived unannounced one morning, clearly expecting to find violations. Instead, I walked him through our operation, showing him our food safety protocols, organic certification records, and employee training documentation. His initial skepticism turned to interest as he learned about our traditional syrup-making methods. "This is actually impressive," he admitted, reviewing our records. "Most operations this size cut corners somewhere, but everything here is by the book." The health department inspection went similarly well. Our production facility exceeded safety standards, and our documentation was impeccable. The tax auditor found our books in perfect order, thanks to years of careful accounting. But Diana wasn't done. When legitimate complaints failed to stick, she tried a different approach. Suddenly, concerned citizens began calling various agencies with increasingly outlandish claims. Allegations of illegal workers, hidden operations, environmental violations. Each claim required investigation. Each investigation took time away. From running the farm, Jennifer helped me document every false complaint, building a pattern of harassment. "This is actually helping our case," she said, adding another incident to our growing file. "She's creating a paper trail of malicious behavior." The turning point came during the Labor Department investigation. The inspector, following up on anonymous tips about worker violations, interviewed our small seasonal staff. What she found instead were loyal employees, many of whom had worked with my family for generations, all properly documented and fairly compensated. One of our longest-serving workers, Miguel Rodriguez, had been with us for 20 years. His testimony about our working conditions and family-oriented business practices completely contradicted the anonymous complaints. "This farm," he told the inspector, "treats people right. Always has, always will." The inspector was clearly moved by the genuine responses from our workers. She pulled me aside afterward. "Mr. Anderson, I've seen a lot of agricultural operations, but this is something special. You're not just running a business, you're preserving a way of life." That evening, as I sat with Jennifer reviewing the latest round of inspection reports, we realized something important. Diana's attempts to bury us in regulatory issues had backfired. Instead of finding violations, the various inspections had documented and officially verified our compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. "She's actually strengthened your position," Jennifer noted, organizing the inspection reports. "Every agency that's investigated has found you operating above board. That's going to matter when we go to court." But even as we celebrated this small victory, we knew Diana Cooper wouldn't give up easily. The question was, what would she try next? The answer would come that very night, in a way that would force me to defend not just my property rights, but my family's entire legacy. Looking out across the maple grove as darkness fell, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were approaching a critical moment in this conflict. Diana had tried legal pressure, public opinion, and now regulatory harassment. Each attempt had failed, but each failure made her more desperate and potentially more dangerous. "Stay alert," Jennifer warned as she left that evening. "Someone willing to go to these lengths isn't going to stop just because their tactics aren't working. If anything, it makes them more unpredictable." She was right, and the next phase of Diana Cooper's campaign would prove just how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. The confrontation I had been dreading finally arrived at midnight, when my security system's alert jolted me awake. The cameras showed multiple flashlights moving through the maple grove, heading toward the stream boundary. This wasn't like Diana's previous stunts. These people were clearly trying to avoid detection. I immediately called Officer Reynolds and Jennifer, then grabbed my own flashlight and headed out. As I approached the stream, I could hear the sound of machinery. Not the heavy equipment from before, but something smaller, more portable. What I found made my blood run cold. A team of workers was attempting to install prefabricated bridge, supports under the cover of darkness. They had already begun drilling into the stream bank, and I could see sections of bridge decking ready to be assembled. "Stop what you're doing right now!" I shouted, training my flashlight on the scene while recording with my phone. "This is private property, and you're in violation of multiple court orders." The workers froze, caught in the act. Then I heard a familiar voice from the shadows. "Keep working," Diana Cooper commanded, stepping into view. "We have every right to be here." "No, you don't," I replied firmly, keeping my camera steady. "This is criminal trespassing and violation of a court order. The police are on their way." Diana's laugh was cold. "By the time they arrive, the supports will be in place. Once they're installed, removing them would violate environmental regulations about disturbing the stream bed. Quite a clever solution, don't you think?" Her arrogance was staggering. She had actually planned to use environmental regulations, the very ones she had been violating to protect her illegal construction. But before I could respond, multiple police cruisers appeared, their lights illuminating the entire scene. Officer Reynolds took charge immediately. "Everyone stop what you're doing. Step away from the equipment." Diana produced yet another clipboard. "Officer, we have permits for this work. If you stop us now, you'll be interfering with a legally approved construction project." "At midnight?" Reynolds asked skeptically. "Let's see these permits." As Diana argued with the police, Jennifer arrived, looking like she'd dressed in a hurry but fully alert. She took one look at the scene and started documenting everything with her own camera. "This is perfect," she whispered to me. "Attempting illegal construction at night, using forged permits again. She's just handed us everything we need." But Diana had one more card to play. "If you stop this work," she announced loudly, clearly playing to the growing crowd of onlookers, drawn by the commotion, "you'll be costing the community millions in development revenue." "Is that what you want, Thomas? To be known as the man who killed this town's future?" "The only future you care about is your own profit," I shot back. "These aren't community development plans. They're real estate schemes. And I have proof." That got her attention. Jennifer stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Miss Cooper, would you like to explain these documents we've uncovered? The ones showing your plans to convert this heritage bridge project into a luxury housing development the moment you gain control of the property." Diana's composure cracked. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Those documents are confidential," she snapped. "You had no right—" "They're public records," Jennifer interrupted smoothly, "filed with the State Development Board under your company's name. You just didn't expect anyone to find them." The workers, sensing the shift in momentum, began backing away from their equipment. Several of them were already talking to the police, apparently eager to distance themselves from what was clearly an illegal operation. State Environmental Inspector Martinez arrived next, looking both angry and grimly satisfied. "Ms. Cooper," she called out, "I've been waiting for something like this, attempting unauthorized construction in a protected watershed at night without proper permits. That's not just a civil violation anymore, that's criminal environmental damage." Diana's face had gone pale, but she maintained her defiant stance. "This isn't over," she hissed at me. "You have no idea what's really at stake here." "I think I do," I replied calmly. "The question is, do your investors know what you've been doing with their money?" That hit home. Diana's expression shifted from anger to something close to panic. Without another word, she turned and strode away, leaving her workers to face the consequences of her schemes. The rest of the night was a blur of police statements, environmental assessments, and documentation. Jennifer worked tirelessly, ensuring every aspect of Diana's failed midnight construction attempt was properly recorded and filed. As dawn broke over the maple grove, the full extent of what had happened began to sink in. Diana Cooper had just crossed a line from civil disputes into criminal behavior, but something about her parting words nagged at me. What did she mean by, "What's really at stake?" "We need to dig deeper," Jennifer said, as if reading my thoughts. "This isn't just about building a bridge anymore. There's something else going on here, something we're missing." Looking at the damaged stream bank and the abandoned construction materials, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover something much bigger than a simple property dispute. Diana Cooper's desperate midnight attempt at construction wasn't just about access to my land. It was about something hidden, something she needed badly enough to risk criminal charges to get it. The question was, what could be valuable enough to make someone take such risks? The answer would prove more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The morning after Diana's midnight construction attempt, I received a call from one of her former employees, a man named Michael Chen. He wanted to meet, but insisted it had to be away from both my property and anywhere Diana might have connections. We arranged to meet at a small diner, 2 towns over, where Jennifer insisted on joining us for legal protection. Michael arrived looking nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. "I worked as Diana's project manager for 3 years, he began, speaking in low tones despite the nearly empty diner. "I quit last month when I realized what she was really doing with these heritage preservation projects, what she's trying to do to your farm. She's done it before, but never for the reasons she claims." He pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the table. "These are internal documents from her development company, survey reports, geological studies, things she never meant anyone else to see. You need to understand, this isn't about a bridge or public access. It's about what's under your land." Jennifer immediately connected the drive to her laptop, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the files. "Thomas," she said quietly, "according to these surveys, there's a significant deposit of rare earth minerals under your property. The kind used in high-tech manufacturing, worth millions." Michael nodded grimly. "The stream boundary is the key access point. That's why she's so desperate to build there. It's the easiest way to reach the deposits. The bridge project is just a cover story. Once she has access, the real work begins." "How did she find out about this?" I asked, struggling to process. "This revelation. Geological surveys from her previous projects," Michael explained. "She has a team that analyzes potential sites. When they identified the deposits under your farm, she immediately started planning how to gain control of the property. The whole heritage angle, the community pressure, the environmental studies, it's all a smokescreen. Jennifer was already documenting everything, her legal mind working overtime. "This changes everything," she said. "It's not just property rights anymore, it's resource rights. and her attempts to gain access through deception and forged documents now looked like attempted mineral theft. Michael wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "Diana's company is in trouble. She's leveraged everything on getting access to these minerals. Her investors are demanding results, and she's running out of time. That's why she's getting so desperate." As if to confirm his words, my phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Last chance, Thomas. Name your price, or things get really unpleasant." I showed the message to Jennifer, who immediately added it to our evidence file. "Classic escalating threats," she noted, "but now we know why she's so desperate." Michael looked increasingly uncomfortable. "You don't understand. She's not just desperate, she's dangerous. I've seen what happens to people who get in her way. That's why I quit. That's why I'm here. Someone needed to warn you." "Has she threatened you?" Jennifer asked sharply. "Not directly. She's too smart for that. But accidents happen around her. Projects, equipment failures, mysterious fires, things that can't quite be proven but send a clear message." The implications were chilling. Diana Cooper wasn't just a developer trying to grab land. She was a calculating businesswoman, willing to do whatever it took to access valuable minerals, using the cover of community development to hide her true intentions. Jennifer spent the next hour copying everything from the USB drive, asking Michael detailed questions about Diana's operations. When he finally left, slipping out the back door after checking to make sure no one was watching, we had a much clearer picture of what we were dealing with. "This explains everything," Jennifer said as we drove back. "The forged documents, the midnight construction attempt, the pressure campaign. It was all about getting access to those minerals without anyone realizing their existence." "What's our next move?" I asked, watching the familiar landscape of my farm come into view. "We document everything Michael gave us, file it with the proper authorities, and prepare for Diana's reaction when she realizes her secret is out." "But, Thomas..." Jennifer paused, her expression serious. "We need to be careful. Someone willing to go to these lengths for minerals worth millions isn't going to give up easily." As we pulled up to my farmhouse, I noticed fresh tire tracks leading toward the stream boundary. Someone had been there while we were gone. Jennifer immediately started taking photos, but I was already moving toward the maple grove, a sense of dread growing with each step. What we found confirmed our worst fears. Several of my oldest maple trees near the stream had been damaged, their taps broken and bark scarred. It looked like an accident, something that could be blamed on vandals or weather, but the message was clear. "She's escalating," Jennifer said, quietly, documenting the damage. "This is just the beginning. Looking at my damaged trees, generations old and now bearing the scars of Diana's greed, I felt a deep anger rising. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could take whatever they wanted through intimidation and deception. "We fight back," I said firmly. "Not just legally, but publicly. It's time everyone knew who Diana Cooper really is and what she's really after." Jennifer nodded, already making calls. The next phase of our battle was about to begin, and this time we had the truth on our side. Armed with Michael Chen's revelations and evidence about the mineral deposits, Jennifer and I began implementing our counter-strategy. The first step was filing detailed reports with state and federal agencies about Diana's real intentions and her pattern of deceptive practices. "We need to hit multiple angles," Jennifer explained as we worked late into the night. "Environmental, Protection Agency, Mining Regulatory Board, Securities and Exchange Commission, especially given how she's misleading her investors. Each report builds our case and forces official investigations. But Diana Cooper didn't wait for the bureaucratic wheels to turn. The morning after we filed our reports, she launched a new offensive, this time targeting my maple syrup business directly. Suddenly, local stores began pulling my products from their shelves, citing quality concerns that had mysteriously emerged after years of perfect safety records. She's trying to cut off your income, Jennifer observed grimly. Make you desperate. Enough to sell. The pressure didn't stop there. Local restaurants that had proudly featured my maple syrup for years abruptly cancelled their orders. Even my regular customers began receiving anonymous emails warning about unsafe production practices at my farm. But Diana had miscalculated. My customers weren't just buyers. They were people who had known my family for generations. Many responded to the smear campaign by publicly defending our products and increasing their orders. Some even organized a Save the Anderson Farm campaign on social media, sharing stories about our farm's history and importance to the community. The local farmers' market became a battleground of sorts. When Diana's supporters tried to distribute flyers questioning my farm's practices, other vendors united in support. Old farming families who had known my great-grandfather stood up and shared stories about our farm's legacy of quality and integrity. She doesn't understand rural communities, remarked Bill Henderson, watching another of Diana's attempts at public manipulation backfire. She thinks everything's for sale, that everyone has a price, but some things run deeper than money. Diana's response to this show of community support was swift and cruel. One morning, I discovered that someone had tampered with our syrup processing equipment during the night. If I hadn't checked everything carefully before starting production, it could have contaminated an entire batch. The police investigated, but as usual, there was no direct evidence linking the vandalism to Diana. However, Officer Reynolds quietly advised us to install additional security cameras around the production facility. Sometimes, the best evidence comes from catching someone in the act, he suggested. Jennifer helped me document every incident, building our case methodically. She's getting sloppy, she noted, reviewing security footage of suspicious vehicles near the property. The more desperate she gets, the more mistakes she'll make. The turning point came when Diana attempted to hold another town council meeting about her Heritage Bridge project. This time, armed with the truth about the mineral deposits, we were ready. Jennifer had prepared a comprehensive presentation about Diana's real intentions and her history of similar schemes in other communities. As Diana stood before the council, once again spinning her tale about community access and historical preservation, I noticed something different in the room. The council members weren't nodding along anymore. The audience wasn't buying her practiced sincerity. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out everything. The geological surveys showing the mineral deposits, the internal documents revealing her true plans, her pattern of using heritage preservation as a cover for resource extraction. I showed photos of the environmental damage she'd already caused and documentation of her attempts to forge permits and documents. This isn't about public access or community heritage, I concluded. It's about a developer trying to steal valuable minerals from our land using fraud and intimidation. Is that the kind of progress we want in our community? The silence in the room was deafening. Diana's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Council members exchanged troubled looks. When Diana tried to respond, her usual smooth confidence was gone, replaced by barely controlled anger. "These are baseless accusations," she sputtered. "Mr. Anderson is trying to deflect attention from his own refusal to embrace community development. Is this baseless too?" Jennifer interrupted, projecting an email onto the screen. It was correspondence between Diana and her investors, explicitly discussing the mineral deposits and their estimated value. Or should we discuss the forged permits, the environmental violations, the attempted midnight construction? Diana's face went pale. Without another word, she gathered her papers and stormed out of the meeting, leaving her supporters bewildered and the council members murmuring among themselves. The meeting marked a shift in the community's perception, but I knew it wasn't over. If anything, Exposing Diana's true motives had made her more dangerous. She had millions of dollars at stake and investors to answer to. The question wasn't if she would retaliate, but when and how. That evening, as Jennifer and I reviewed security footage from around the property, she voiced what we were both thinking. Be careful, Thomas. Someone willing to forge documents and vandalize property isn't going to let millions in minerals slip away easily. This is when she's most dangerous. Looking out over my maple grove in the gathering dusk, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading toward a final confrontation. Diana Cooper had shown she was willing to break the law to get what she wanted. The question was, how far would she go now that her true motives were exposed? The answer would come sooner than expected, and it would test not just my resolve, but the very foundations of our community's values. The day after the town council meeting, Diana launched what she must have thought would be her masterstroke. Early morning brought a fleet of news vans to my property, accompanied by what looked like a small army of protesters. But these weren't local residents. They were professional activists, clearly brought in from outside. They carried sophisticated signs about environmental justice and community rights. And they had a polished spokesperson who gave well-rehearsed interviews about the importance of shared natural resources and equitable access to heritage sites. It was a media circus, carefully orchestrated to paint me as an environmental, a villain, and Diana as a crusading community advocate. This is a professional operation, Jennifer observed as we watched from my porch. Look at their matching t-shirts, the coordinated messaging. She's spent serious money on this. Diana herself arrived in a sleek SUV, dressed for the cameras in what looked like carefully chosen outdoor activist attire. She moved from interview to interview, telling her story about trying to preserve historic access to the property and protect community environmental interests. But she had made a crucial mistake. In her rush to control the narrative, she hadn't counted on the local community's response. Word of the protests spread quickly through town, and soon local residents began showing up, not to join Diana's protesters, but to support me. Bill Henderson arrived with historical photos showing my family's century-long stewardship of the land. Miguel Rodriguez brought other farm workers who testified about our sustainable farming practices. Even Sarah Martinez, the state environmental inspector, showed up voluntarily to speak about our excellent compliance record. The narrative began to shift as local reporters who knew the community's history started asking Diana's protesters some pointed questions. Where were they from? How long had they been involved in local environmental issues? None could answer basic questions about the area or its history. Then Jennifer made her move. She had prepared packets for the media containing everything. The geological surveys showing the mineral deposits, Diana's internal company documents discussing their value, and records of her similar schemes in other communities. Most devastatingly, she included proof of payments to the professional protesters, showing this whole demonstration was a paid performance. "Ms. Cooper," one reporter called out, waving the documents, "would you care to comment on these records showing you paid a professional protest organization to be here today?" Diana's composed expression flickered. Before she could respond, another reporter jumped in. "And what about these geological surveys showing valuable mineral deposits under the Anderson farm? Is this really about community access, or is it about mining rights?" The professional protesters, realizing they'd been exposed, began to look uncomfortable. Their spokesperson tried to stick to the script about community rights, but local residents kept interrupting with facts about my family's history and our environmental record. The final blow came when Michael Chen arrived. Despite his obvious nervousness, he stepped forward to speak to the media about his time as Diana's project manager and what he'd discovered about her real intentions. "Everything about this project is fake," he declared, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. The community interest, the environmental concerns, even these protesters, it's all a cover story to gain access to valuable minerals. I know because I helped plan similar operations in other communities before I realized what we were really doing. Diana's carefully orchestrated media event was crumbling. The professional protesters, realizing they'd been made part of an exposed scheme, began quietly packing up their signs and leaving. Local residents, emboldened by the truth coming out, shared their own stories about my family's contributions to the community. In the midst of this chaos, I noticed Diana having an intense phone conversation. Her face had lost all its practiced composure, and she was gesturing angrily. When she finished, she stormed over to where Jennifer and I stood. "You think you've won?" she hissed, all pretense of civility gone. "This isn't over. That mineral deposit is worth millions, and one way or another, I'm going to access it. You can't guard your precious farm 24 hours a day." Jennifer stepped forward, phone recording. "Was that a threat, Ms. Cooper? Would you care to clarify that statement for the record?" Diana's eyes flashed with fury, but she caught herself. Without another word, she turned and strode back to her SUV, leaving her hired protesters to fend for themselves as the media continued to ask uncomfortable questions about their involvement. As the circus wound down and the news vans began to leave, Jennifer helped me document everything for our growing legal case. "She's right about one thing," she said grimly. "This isn't over. That last threat wasn't just anger, it was a promise. We need to be ready for whatever she tries next." Looking at the discarded protest signs littering my property, I couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. Diana Cooper had just been publicly exposed and humiliated. Her carefully constructed narrative had been shattered, and her professional protest had backfired spectacularly. People like her don't take that kind of defeat lightly. "What do you think she'll do?" I asked Jennifer as we watched the last of the news vans pull away. "Something desperate," she replied. "She's invested too much to walk away, and now she's angry. That's a dangerous combination." We didn't have to wait long to find out just how dangerous an angry and desperate Diana Cooper could be. That night, after the media chaos had died down, I patrolled my property one last time before turning in. Everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. The crickets had stopped chirping, and there was an unusual stillness in the air that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Around 2 a.m., my security system's alert jolted me awake. The cameras showed multiple vehicles approaching the stream boundary, their headlights off. This wasn't like Diana's previous attempts. These looked like construction vehicles, and they were moving with purpose. I immediately called both Jennifer and the police, then grabbed my flashlight and phone. As I approached the stream, I could hear the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery starting up. When I got closer, what I saw made my heart stop. A full construction crew was rapidly assembling prefabricated bridge sections, working with military precision under portable floodlights. Diana Cooper stood in the midst of it all, barking orders through a radio. When she saw me approaching, she didn't even try to maintain her usual facade of politeness. "You might as well go back to bed, Thomas," she called out. "By sunrise, the bridge supports will be in place. Try to remove them then, and you'll be violating federal waterway protection laws." "This is illegal construction on private property," I shouted back, already recording everything on my phone. "The police are on their way." "The police?" Diana laughed. "By the time they get here, it'll be a fait accompli. Sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission." But she had miscalculated. Officer Reynolds had anticipated something like this after Diana's earlier threat. 2 police cruisers were already screaming down the road, lights flashing, and I could hear more sirens in the distance. "Everyone stop." "What you're doing?" Reynolds commanded through his loudspeaker. "This is an illegal construction site. Step away from the equipment immediately. The construction workers hesitated, looking to Diana for direction. She pulled out her ever-present clipboard. "We have permits." "No, you don't," came a familiar voice. Sarah Martinez, the state environmental inspector, emerged from one of the police cars. "And this time, Ms. Cooper, you're under arrest for attempted illegal construction and violation of multiple cease and desist orders." Diana's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't understand," she screamed. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here? Those minerals are worth millions. I have investors waiting, and there it is," Jennifer said, suddenly appearing beside me with her phone recording. "A full confession about your real motives, Ms. Cooper. Would you care to elaborate about these minerals you're so desperate to access illegally?" Diana's face went white as she realized what she'd just admitted in front of multiple witnesses and cameras. The construction workers, seeing the situation deteriorating, began backing away from their equipment. "Nobody move," Diana shouted. "I'm paying triple overtime for this job, and we're finishing it tonight." But her workers had already seen enough. One by one, they shut down their machines and stepped away, hands raised as police officers approached. To take statements, Diana, watching her plan collapse, made one last desperate move. She ran to the nearest excavator, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. "If you won't build it, I'll do it myself." "Diana, stop," I shouted. "You'll destroy the stream bank." But she wasn't listening. The excavator lurched forward, its bucket swinging wildly toward the water. Officer Reynolds reacted instantly, calling for additional units, while Martinez began documenting the environmental violations in real time. The excavator's treads dug into the soft earth near the stream, and suddenly everything went wrong. This bank, weakened by previous construction attempts, began to crumble. The massive machine started to tilt precariously toward the water. "Get out of there," Reynolds shouted. "The bank's collapsing." For a moment, Diana sat frozen in the cab as the excavator slowly tipped toward the stream. Finally, self-preservation kicked in, and she scrambled out just as the machine slid sideways, its bucket plunging into the water with a massive splash. The silence that followed was deafening. Diana stood at the edge of the damaged stream bank, staring at the half-submerged excavator, her dreams of mineral wealth literally sinking before her eyes. "Diana Cooper," Officer Reynolds said formally, approaching with handcuffs, "you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, attempted illegal construction, violation of environmental protection orders, and reckless endangerment." As the police led her away, I surveyed the damage with Jennifer and Martinez. The stream bank was badly damaged, and the partially submerged excavator would require specialized equipment to remove without causing further environmental harm. "We'll add environmental restoration costs to the lawsuit," Jennifer assured me, documenting everything with her camera. "But Thomas, I think we finally have her. This was too public, too obvious. There's no way she can spin this." Looking at the scene of destruction, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Diana's desperate attempt had failed, but at what cost to the land? The damage would heal eventually, but it was a stark reminder of how greed could destroy something precious. In an instant, as dawn broke over the maple grove, state environmental teams were already arriving to assess the damage and begin planning the excavator's removal. Diana's final gambit had failed spectacularly, but something told me this still wasn't completely over. People like her always had one last card to play. The aftermath of Diana's midnight excavator incident brought a flurry of activity to my farm. Environmental teams worked carefully to remove the half-submerged machine without causing further damage. To the stream bank, news crews cycled through, documenting the destruction and interviewing locals about Diana Cooper's failed attempt to force her way onto my property. But while Diana sat in county jail awaiting bail, her legal team was working overtime. By afternoon, they had secured her release and immediately filed a barrage of countersuit. Their claims were outrageous, allegations that I had somehow lured her into attempting the midnight construction, that I was the one violating environmental regulations, that her actions were justified by some obscure historical precedent. "This is desperation," Jennifer said, reviewing the legal documents. "She's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. But there's something else going on here. These filings are too complex, too detailed to have been prepared so quickly." She was right. As we dug deeper, we discovered that Diana's legal team had prepared these documents weeks ago. They had been ready for this scenario, which meant the midnight construction attempt wasn't just desperation, it was part of a larger strategy. "Look at this," Jennifer pointed to a clause buried in one of the filings. "They're trying to use the environmental damage from the excavator incident to force a government intervention. If they can prove the stream is now at risk, they could petition for emergency access to stabilize the area." It was clever in a twisted way. Diana had created an environmental crisis, and now her team was trying to use that very crisis to gain the access she wanted. But they hadn't counted on Sarah Martinez and her environmental protection team. "The damage is significant but contained," Martinez explained as we walked the property. "More importantly, we have documented proof that the damage was caused by Ms. Cooper's illegal actions. Any petition for emergency access would have to go through my office, and I can tell you right now, that's not happening." But Diana had one more card to play. That evening, a delegation from her development company arrived at my farm. They were led by a smooth-talking executive named Richard Palmer, who presented himself as a reasonable alternative to Diana's aggressive tactics. "Mr. Anderson," Palmer said, seated in my kitchen with his team of lawyers, "we want to resolve this situation amicably. Ms. Cooper's methods were unfortunate, but the fundamental issue remains. There are valuable minerals under your property, minerals that could benefit the entire community." "You mean benefit your shareholders?" I countered. Palmer smiled thinly. "We're prepared to offer you triple the market value of your property, plus a percentage of any future mining revenues. This could set your family up for generations." Jennifer, who I'd insisted be present for the meeting, leaned forward. "And what about the environmental impact, the destruction of a century-old farm, the damage to the watershed?" "Progress requires sacrifice," Palmer replied smoothly. "But I assure you, our mining operations would be conducted with the utmost care for environmental concerns." I looked out my window at the maple grove, at the trees my great-grandfather had planted at the stream that had nourished this land for generations. Then I looked back at Palmer and his team of lawyers with their expensive suits and practiced smiles. "No," I said simply. Palmer's smile faltered. "Mr. Anderson, be reasonable. This offer is more than generous. If you force us to pursue other options—" "Other options," Jennifer interrupted. "Like more midnight construction attempts, more forged documents, more accidents?" "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Palmer replied coldly. "But you should understand. These minerals will be extracted one way or another. The only question is whether you benefit from it or not." I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "The only thing I understand is that you and Diana Cooper are cut from the same cloth. You think everything has a price, that anyone can be bought. But this land isn't just property to me. It's my heritage, my responsibility, and it's not for sale at any price." As Palmer and his team left, I could hear them already on their phones, presumably reporting my refusal to their superiors. Jennifer stayed behind, helping me document the meeting and add it to our growing case file. "They'll try something else," she warned. That wasn't just a buyout offer, it was a threat wrapped in corporate politeness. She was right. The next morning, I discovered that Diana's company had filed for emergency mining rights with the state, claiming that the minerals under my farm were crucial to national technology interests and should be subject to eminent domain. "They're getting desperate," Jennifer said as we prepared our response. But they've made a mistake. By admitting the real reason they want the land, they've exposed their entire scheme. All those community heritage claims, all the public access arguments, it's all been exposed as a cover for mineral exploitation. Looking at the damaged stream bank, still bearing the scars of Diana's failed midnight construction, I felt more determined than ever. This wasn't just about protecting my property anymore. It was about standing up to corporate greed that would destroy anything in its path to profit. "We fight," I told Jennifer. "Whatever it takes, we fight." She nodded, already pulling up documents. On her laptop, "They want a legal battle. Let's give them one they'll never forget." The stage was set for what would become not just a fight for my farm, but a battle over principles that would resonate far beyond our small community. The hearing for Diana's emergency mining rights petition was scheduled for a week later at the state courthouse. In the meantime, her company launched a sophisticated media campaign, running ads about vital mineral resources and economic development opportunities being blocked by short-sighted rural interests. The morning of the hearing, I arrived to find the courthouse steps crowded with reporters and cameras. Diana was there with her corporate legal team, looking polished and professional, as if the midnight excavator incident had never happened. Richard Palmer stood beside her, both of them projecting an image of reasonable business people facing unreasonable opposition. Jennifer met me at the entrance carrying boxes of documents. "Remember," she whispered as we walked in, "they're going to try to make this about progress versus tradition, development versus stagnation. Don't let them frame the narrative. This is about law versus lawlessness, honest dealing versus deception." The hearing room was packed. Diana's team had brought expert witnesses, geologists, economists, and development specialists, all ready to testify about the critical importance of the minerals under my farm. But we had our own witnesses, environmental experts, local historians, and most importantly, Michael Chen, ready to expose the truth about Diana's operations. Diana's lead attorney opened with a masterful performance, painting a picture of vital economic opportunity being blocked by outdated sentimentality. He showed glossy presentations about job creation and technological progress, carefully sidestepping any mention of their previous illegal attempts to access the property. When our turn came, Jennifer started not with emotional appeals about family, heritage, but with cold, hard evidence. She presented a timeline of Diana's activities, the forged documents, the illegal construction attempts, the environmental violations, and the pattern of similar schemes in other communities. "Your Honor," Jennifer said, "this case isn't about mining rights or economic development. It's about a corporation attempting to use emergency powers to legitimize what they failed to obtain through fraud and force." Then she played her master stroke. "I'd like to call Michael Chen to the stand." Michael walked forward, visibly nervous but determined. Under Jennifer's questioning, he detailed Diana's entire operation, how they identified properties with valuable minerals, how they created fake community issues to pressure owners, and how they used any means necessary to gain control. "The Heritage Bridge project was never real," Michael testified. "It was always about the minerals. Ms. Cooper knew that if the true purpose was revealed, there would be environmental studies, impact assessments, public hearings. So she created a false narrative about community access to bypass all that." Diana's attorneys objected repeatedly, but the judge let Michael continue. When he described how they had similarly deceived other communities, Diana's composed facade finally cracked. She began whispering urgently to Palmer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. During cross-examination, Diana's attorneys tried to discredit Michael, suggesting he was a disgruntled ex-employee with a vendetta. But Jennifer was ready. She presented internal company emails, confirming everything Michael had said. including discussions about how to hide their true intentions from local authorities. The turning point came when Sarah Martinez testified about the environmental damage from the midnight excavator incident. She presented detailed analysis showing how Diana's attempted construction had already impacted the watershed and how their proposed mining operation would devastate the local ecosystem. "Your Honor," Martinez concluded, "this isn't just about one farm. The mineral deposits they want to access are part of a complex geological system that affects water quality throughout the region. Their emergency is entirely self-created, and their proposed solution would cause irreparable harm." As the evidence mounted, I watched Diana's confidence crumble. Her perfectly maintained appearance began to show cracks, her hands nervously shuffling papers as each new piece of evidence further exposed her schemes. The final blow came when Jennifer presented the full financial records Michael had provided, showing how Diana's company had systematically deceived investors about their methods of acquiring property rights. "This petition for emergency mining rights," Jennifer summarized, "is simply the latest attempt to legitimize what is, at its core, a fraudulent enterprise. They're not asking for emergency access to serve the public good. They're asking this: court to reward their illegal behavior and validate their deception." The judge, who had been taking careful notes throughout, looked directly at Diana and her team. "I've heard enough," she said. "This petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation into possible criminal charges regarding the pattern of fraudulent activities presented here." Diana stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea what you're costing this community? Those minerals are worth millions." "Ms. Cooper," the judge said sharply, "I suggest you remain silent before you give the Attorney General's office more to investigate." As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us, but Jennifer handled the questions while I watched Diana and Palmer having what appeared to be a heated argument near their cars. Whatever partnership they'd had was clearly fracturing under the weight of their exposed schemes. "This isn't over," Jennifer warned as we drove back to the farm. "The criminal investigation will take time, and they might try other tactics while they can. But today was a big win." Looking at the autumn colors of my maple grove as we approached the farm, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We had won this battle, but something told me Diana Cooper wasn't done yet. People like her don't accept defeat easily, and she still had resources and connections to cause trouble. The question was, what would she try next, and how far would she go, now that she had nothing left to lose? Diana's response to her courtroom defeat came swifter and more aggressively than anyone expected. The morning after the hearing, I woke to find a fleet of private security vehicles parked along the road bordering my property. Men in tactical gear patrolled the boundary, supposedly protecting corporate interests in the area. "They can't legally enter your property," Jennifer assured me over the phone, "but they're trying to intimidate you and monitor your movements. Document everything, every vehicle, every guard, every interaction." The security presence was just the beginning. Diana's company began buying up properties surrounding my farm, creating what amounted to a corporate blockade. Access roads that I'd used for years were suddenly closed due to safety concerns. Deliveries to the farm became complicated as drivers had to navigate an increasingly hostile gauntlet. "She's trying to choke you out," Jennifer explained during an emergency meeting. "If she can't take the property by force or legal means, she'll try to make it impossible for you to operate." The pressure intensified when Diana's security team began using high-powered spotlights at night, claiming they were necessary for property surveillance. The lights disrupted my sleep and stressed the local wildlife, but technically stayed just within legal bounds. Local law enforcement felt handicapped. "They're staying just on their side of the line," Officer Reynolds admitted frustratedly. Unless they cross onto your property or clearly break a law, there's not much we can do. But Diana had underestimated the community's response to her tactics. When word spread about the corporate blockade, local farmers began offering alternative access routes through their properties. Customers organized convoys to reach the farm store, turning shopping trips into acts of defiance against corporate bullying. Bill Henderson, whose property bordered mine, went a step further. He officially granted me an easement through his land, ensuring I had unrestricted access regardless of Diana's blockade. Other neighbors followed suit, creating a network of legal pathways that bypassed Diana's security checkpoints. The security guards themselves became an unexpected source of information. Some, uncomfortable with their role in corporate harassment, began quietly sharing details about Diana's operations. They revealed that the company was in financial turmoil, with investors growing increasingly concerned about the failed attempts to access the mineral deposits. Then came the incident that would finally turn the tide. One night, one of Diana's security guards observed suspicious activity near their own equipment. Several men were tampering with the spotlights and security cameras, apparently staging an incident to blame on me. The guard, a former military veteran named James Wilson, made a decision that would change everything. He recorded the entire setup on his phone, capturing clear evidence of Diana's team attempting to frame me for vandalism. The next morning, when Diana tried to file police reports about criminal damage to her security equipment, Wilson stepped forward with the truth. His video showed her own people orchestrating the damage, complete with audio of them discussing how to make it look like I was responsible. Jennifer immediately filed new legal motions based on this evidence. "This is attempted fraud," she explained. "They tried to frame you for a crime they committed themselves. That's criminal conspiracy." The district attorney's office, already investigating Diana's company for other irregularities, took immediate interest. Search warrants were issued for corporate offices and electronic records. The investigation quickly expanded beyond just the attempted frame-up to encompass the entire pattern of deceptive practices. Diana's carefully constructed facade began to crumble completely. Internal documents revealed that the security operation wasn't just about intimidation. They had been conducting illegal surveillance, recording conversations, and collecting personal information about me and my supporters. The corporate investors, already nervous about the failed legal battles, finally lost patience. In an emergency board meeting, Diana was removed from her position. Richard Palmer, trying to save his own career, turned state's evidence, providing detailed testimony about the company's illegal activities. The security guards were withdrawn, the spotlights dismantled. The properties Diana's company had bought were put up for sale, many returning to local ownership. The corporate blockade that had seemed so threatening just weeks before dissolved like morning mist. But the damage to my farm's operations during those weeks of blockade had been real. Jennifer helped me document every loss, every delayed delivery, every cancelled order. These would all become part of our civil lawsuit against Diana and her company. "The criminal investigation will take its course," Jennifer said as we reviewed the mounting evidence, "but we need to make sure you're compensated for the actual harm they caused. This wasn't just harassment. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy your business." Looking out at my maple grove, now peaceful again without the glare of security spotlights, I felt both vindicated and saddened. Diana's desperate tactics had failed, but they had revealed how vulnerable small farmers were to corporate pressure tactics. "We need to make sure this can't happen to anyone else," I told Jennifer. "This isn't just about my farm anymore." She nodded, understanding. "The evidence we've gathered, the pattern we've documented, it could help change laws, protect other family farms from corporate takeover attempts." As fall colors painted the maple grove in brilliant reds and golds, I began to see how this Fight had become something larger than just protecting my own property. It had exposed a pattern of corporate abuse that needed to be addressed, not just for my sake, but for all small farmers facing similar pressures. But even as we prepared for the next phase of legal battles, I couldn't shake the feeling that Diana Cooper had one final move to make. Someone willing to go to such lengths wouldn't simply accept defeat and walk away. The morning calm was shattered by the sound of helicopters. Looking up, I saw two sleek corporate choppers circling my property, hovering low enough to disrupt the early morning peace. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Jennifer, already aware of the situation. "They're doing aerial surveys," she explained urgently. "Diana's company filed an emergency petition claiming they've detected geological instability that could affect the entire region. They're trying to force a government inspection." The helicopters were just the beginning. Within hours, a team of geologists arrived at the property line, escorted by state officials. They carried sophisticated scanning equipment and bore official-looking documents requesting access for emergency assessment of potential geological hazards. "This is her newest angle," Jennifer said when she arrived. "She's trying to create a public safety issue. If they can prove there's a genuine geological threat, they could force access regardless of property rights." Diana herself was conspicuously absent, but Richard Palmer was there, looking uncomfortable as he presented the company's case to the state officials. "Our preliminary scans indicate possible subsidence risks related to the mineral deposits," he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "We have a responsibility to investigate any potential public safety concerns." Jennifer immediately challenged the validity of their claims. "Interesting that these geological concerns only emerged after you failed to gain access through other means," she pointed out. "Do you have any historical data showing these issues existed before your interest in the minerals?" Palmer shuffled his papers nervously, but before he could respond, Sarah Martinez arrived. The environmental inspector had brought her own team of independent geologists, ready to conduct an unbiased assessment. "If there are genuine safety concerns, we'll identify them," Martinez declared. "But this investigation will be conducted by neutral parties, not corporate interests." Over the next several hours, both teams conducted their surveys, taking measurements and soil samples. The corporate helicopters continued their overhead passes, their constant noise a reminder of the pressure tactics being employed. But Diana's latest strategy was about to backfire spectacularly. Martinez's team quickly determined that the only significant ground disturbance in the area had been caused by Diana's company's own attempts at illegal construction, particularly the excavator incident. "The streambank damage they caused has created some minor stability issues," Martinez explained, reviewing the findings. "But ironically, their proposed mining operation would significantly increase any risk of subsidence. They've essentially proven why they shouldn't be allowed to extract those minerals." Palmer looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. Finally, he pulled me aside, speaking quietly. "Look, Anderson, I'm trying to help you here. Diana, she's not stable. After losing control of the company, she's been making threats, talking about taking matters into her own hands. Be careful." Before I could respond, there was a commotion at the property line. Diana had arrived, and she looked nothing like the polished corporate executive we'd faced before. Her appearance was disheveled, her eyes wild with barely contained fury. "You're all idiots," she shouted, storming toward the geological teams. "Those minerals are worth millions. You can't just leave them in the ground because of some trees and a stream." Jennifer quickly started recording as Diana continued her tirade, documenting every word, as she essentially confessed to manipulating the geological survey process. "Ms. Cooper," Martinez interrupted firmly, "are you saying you falsified safety concerns to gain access to private property?" Diana's face contorted with rage. Private property. This isn't about private property. This is about resources that should belong to everyone. Anderson doesn't deserve this land. He doesn't understand its true value. Officers Reynolds and his team, who had been monitoring the situation, stepped forward. Diana's public meltdown was providing all the evidence they needed of her true motives and mental state. "Diana Cooper," Reynolds announced, "you're under arrest for attempting to file false public safety reports and conspiracy to commit fraud." As they led her away, still ranting about the minerals, Palmer turned to me with a grim expression. "I tried to warn you. She's been obsessed with this property, with these minerals. Even after losing corporate backing, she wouldn't let it go." Jennifer helped me document everything. The helicopter surveys, the geological teams, Diana's confession, and Palmer's warning. "This strengthens our case enormously," she said. "But more importantly, it shows exactly how far corporate interests will go to override private property rights." Looking up at the helicopters as they finally retreated, I felt a mixture of relief and concern. Diana's latest attempt had failed, but Palmer's warning was troubling. Someone unstable enough to orchestrate false safety reports and suffer a public meltdown might be capable of anything. "We need to increase security," Jennifer advised, clearly thinking along the same lines. "Diana's lost everything now. Her company, her reputation, her freedom. People are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose." As the state officials packed up their equipment and Martinez's team finalized their reports, I couldn't shake the feeling that this still wasn't over. Diana Cooper had shown she was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to get what she wanted. Now that she'd lost everything, what would stop her from taking even more desperate measures? The answer to that question would come sooner than anyone expected, and it would test not just my resolve, but the very foundations of everything my family had built. The night after Diana's arrest, my security cameras caught movement near the stream boundary. Multiple figures were moving through the darkness, and this time they weren't trying to be stealthy. They carried torches, and I could hear the sound of engines, not construction equipment, but something smaller. I immediately called both Jennifer and the police, but as I watched the security feed, I realized this was different from previous incidents. These weren't contractors or security guards. They looked more like private mercenaries, equipped with tactical gear and moving with military precision. Diana had hired professional muscle for one final attempt. Before the police could arrive, the intruders began setting up what looked like drilling equipment near the stream. They worked quickly and efficiently, clearly well prepared for their task. This wasn't about building a bridge anymore. They were going directly for the minerals. I grabbed my phone to document everything and headed out to confront them, keeping to the shadows. As I got closer, I could hear them communicating via radio, and a familiar voice came through clearly. Diana Cooper, giving orders from somewhere nearby. "I don't care about permits or property rights," her voice crackled over their radios. "Get those core samples. Once we prove the mineral concentration, no judge in the country will deny our claim to them." The team had already started drilling when the first police cruiser arrived, lights off to maintain the element of surprise. Officer Reynolds had called for backup, including state police, but they were still minutes away. "This is the police," Reynolds announced through his loudspeaker. "You are trespassing on private property. Stop all activities immediately." The response was immediate, but not what anyone expected. Instead of fleeing, the mercenaries took defensive positions, their equipment protected behind them. Their leader stepped forward, holding up what looked like official documents. "We have authorization for emergency mineral testing," he claimed, "signed by the State Geological Survey Office." But Jennifer, who had arrived moments after the police, was ready for this. "Those documents are forgeries," she called out. "The state office confirmed that no such authorization exists. Ms. Cooper, we know you're listening. This is another criminal act to add to your charges." Diana's voice came through the radio again, now tinged with desperation. "Keep drilling. We only need 10 minutes to get the samples. Once we have proof of the deposits." She was cut off by the arrival of state police helicopters, their spotlights illuminating the entire scene. The mercenaries, realizing they were surrounded, began to lower their weapons. But Diana wasn't. Done. An engine roared to life in the darkness, and headlights suddenly blazed. Diana's SUV came crashing through the underbrush, heading straight for the drilling equipment. She was trying to reach the samples her team had already collected. "Stop her!" Reynolds shouted, but it was too late. Diana's vehicle reached the drilling site, but in her frenzy, she misjudged the unstable ground near the stream. The SUV's wheels spun in the mud, then slid sideways toward the water. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The weight of the vehicle caused the already weakened streambank to collapse. Diana's SUV tipped precariously, then rolled, coming to rest half-submerged in the stream. Police and emergency responders rushed to the scene. They pulled Diana from the vehicle, physically unhurt but hysterical. As they led her away in handcuffs, she was still ranting about the minerals, about how everyone was conspiring against her, about how she deserved those resources. The mercenaries surrendered without further incident, most of them already on their phones with lawyers. The drilling equipment was confiscated as evidence, along with the core samples they'd managed to collect. Jennifer helped document everything, her camera capturing the scene as emergency crews worked to prevent the SUV's fuel from contaminating. "The stream. This is it," she said quietly. "There's no coming back from this. Our mercenaries forged documents, attempted mineral theft. She's looking at serious federal charges now." Dawn was breaking as the last police vehicles left, taking Diana Cooper away for the final time. The streambank was damaged again, but it could be repaired. The real damage was to Diana herself. She had lost everything, including her freedom, in her obsessive pursuit of minerals that were never hers to take. As I surveyed the scene with Jennifer and Officer Reynolds, I realized something important. This wasn't just about protecting my property anymore. It had become a statement about standing up to corporate greed, about defending not just land rights, but principles. "We need to make sure this never happens to anyone else," I said, watching, as environmental teams began assessing the damage. "No one should have to fight this hard to protect what's rightfully theirs." Jennifer nodded, already thinking ahead to the broader implications of our fight. "This case could set important precedents," she said, "about property rights, about corporate accountability, about environmental protection. Something good can come from all this." Looking at my maple grove in the early morning light, I silently thanked my ancestors for their strength and wisdom in protecting this land. Their legacy had given me the courage to stand firm against those who would destroy it for profit. But even as Diana Cooper was led away to face justice, I couldn't help wondering what would be the final cost of her desperate last stand. The aftermath of Diana Cooper's final desperate act brought significant changes to our quiet corner of Maine. In the weeks following her arrest, the full scope of her illegal activities came to light. The investigation revealed a network of corrupt officials, forged documents, and corporate conspiracies that stretched far beyond our local community. The State Attorney General's office took over the case, and the charges against Diana were extensive. Criminal trespassing, attempted mineral theft, forgery, corruption, environmental violations, and conspiracy. But perhaps most significantly, they uncovered evidence of similar schemes in other communities where she had successfully forced families off their land using the same tactics she had tried to use against me. Jennifer helped coordinate with prosecutors, ensuring that every piece of evidence we had gathered would be used to build the strongest possible case. "This isn't just about punishing Diana Cooper," she explained during one of our meetings. "It's about creating legal precedents. that will protect other landowners from corporate predators. The environmental damage from Diana's final stand took time to repair. Sarah Martinez oversaw the restoration work personally, ensuring that the stream bank was properly stabilized and the ecosystem protected. During the process, her team discovered something unexpected: the mineral deposits that Diana had been so desperate to obtain weren't as valuable as she had believed. The geological surveys her company used were flawed, Martinez explained, showing me the new analysis. They greatly exaggerated the concentration and accessibility of the minerals. She destroyed her life chasing a fortune that was largely imaginary. The mercenaries Diana had hired turned state's evidence, providing detailed testimony about how she had planned her final operation. Many of them were former military personnel who claimed they had been misled about the nature and legality of the job. Their testimony further strengthened the case against her. Richard Palmer also cooperated with authorities, revealing how Diana's obsession with my property had ultimately led to her downfall. She couldn't accept that some things aren't for sale, he told investigators. The more resistance she faced, the more determined she became to win at any cost. The corporate investors who had backed Diana's schemes faced their own legal troubles. Several board members were indicted for their roles in approving illegal tactics and covering up environmental violations. The company itself underwent a major restructuring, with new policies put in place to prevent similar abuses. As winter approached, my maple farm slowly returned to normal. The security cameras remained, but they no longer caught suspicious movements in the night. The stream flowed clear and strong, its banks restored and strengthened. The maple trees, having witnessed yet another challenge to their existence, continued their centuries-old cycle of growth and renewal. Local supporters, who had stood by me throughout the conflict, helped organize a community celebration at the farm. It wasn't just a celebration of victory over corporate greed. It was an affirmation of the values that had brought the community together: respect for the land, support for neighbors, and resistance to those who would destroy our heritage for profit. During the celebration, Bill Henderson made an announcement that brought tears to my eyes. He and several other neighboring farmers had created a legal covenant protecting their lands from corporate development. The agreement would ensure that our corner of Maine remained agricultural land, preserved for future generations. What happened to Thomas could have happened to any of us, Bill declared. By standing together, we're making sure it never happens again. Jennifer helped draft the covenant, ensuring it would stand up to legal challenges. This is how real change happens, she said, not just through court battles, but through communities coming together to protect what matters. The story of our fight against Diana Cooper began attracting attention from environmental groups and property rights advocates across the country. They saw it as a template for how local communities could resist corporate takeover attempts. I found myself being asked to speak at conferences and meetings, sharing our experience to help others protect their land. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during a quiet morning in the maple grove. As I checked the taps, just as my great-grandfather had done nearly a century ago, I found one of his old tools, a worn but still serviceable spile hammer. Holding it, I felt a deep connection to all those who had worked this land before me, who had protected it so I could do the same for future generations. "Your ancestors would be proud," Miguel said, coming up beside me with his collection bucket. "They fought to build this place, and you fought to keep it." Looking at the ancient maples, their branches reaching toward the sky, I understood something important. The real value of this land wasn't in any minerals that might lie beneath it. The real treasure was the legacy of stewardship, the commitment to preserving something precious for those who would come after us. Diana Cooper would face justice for her crimes, but her true punishment was never understanding this simple truth. Some things are worth more than money, and some places deserve to be protected, not exploited. As I worked among the trees that morning, I realized that our victory wasn't just about stopping one person's greed. It was about affirming that there are still places where community matters more than profit, where heritage outweighs development, and where people will stand together to protect what truly matters. The maple farm had survived another challenge, emerging stronger for the fight. But more importantly, it had helped inspire others to protect their own pieces of the world from those who would destroy them for temporary gain. The final chapter of this story unfolded in the state courthouse, where Diana Cooper faced sentencing for her crimes. The courtroom was packed with people from our community, environmental activists and media representatives, all waiting to see justice served. Diana looked nothing like the polished executive who had first appeared on my property with dreams of building a bridge. Her designer suits were replaced by prison attire, her confident demeanor shattered by the weight of her actions. As the judge read through the extensive list of charges, I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and sadness at how far she had fallen. "Ms. Cooper," the judge began, "your actions represent a disturbing pattern of corporate abuse, environmental destruction, and criminal behavior. You have shown no remorse for attempting to destroy a family farm that has stood for generations, nor for the environmental damage you caused in your pursuit of profit." The sentence was severe: 15 years in federal prison, millions in fines and restitution, and a lifetime ban from holding any corporate executive position. More importantly, the judge's ruling included provisions that would help protect other landowners from similar schemes. After the sentencing, Jennifer helped me understand the broader implications of our victory. "This case has set several important precedents," she explained. "It establishes stronger protections against corporate land grabs, increases penalties for environmental violations, and recognizes the value of historical family farms beyond just their monetary worth." The state legislature, spurred by our case, began working on new laws to protect agricultural land from corporate exploitation. They called it the Heritage Farm Protection Act, and I was asked to testify during the legislative sessions about our experience. Richard Palmer, who had cooperated with prosecutors, received a lighter sentence but was barred from the development industry. Before being taken to serve his time, he asked to speak with me privately. "I need you to understand something," he said, looking older and more humble than I remembered. "Diana wasn't always like this. She started out wanting to create something meaningful, but somewhere along the way, profit became more important than people. Don't let anyone else make that same mistake." The corporate investors who had backed Diana's schemes faced their own reckonings. Several board members were indicted, and the company underwent a complete restructuring. The new management reached out to make amends, offering to fund environmental restoration projects in communities where they had caused damage. Back at the farm, life gradually returned to its natural rhythm. The maple trees continued their ancient cycle, unbothered by the human drama that had swirled around them. The stream, fully restored, ran clear and strong, its banks more secure than ever thanks to Martinez's restoration work. The community that had come together to support me remained united. The legal covenant protecting local farmland expanded as more property owners joined, creating a protected agricultural zone that would preserve our way of life for future generations. One morning, as I worked among the maple trees with Miguel and our team, a young family stopped by the farm store. Their children were fascinated by the syrup-making process, and the parents asked if they could take a tour. As I showed them around, explaining how the maple trees had sustained my family for generations, I saw in their eyes the same wonder that I'd felt as a child learning from my father. They understood that this wasn't just a business, it was a living piece of history, a connection to the land that deserved to be protected. "Will the trees be here when we grow up?" one of the children asked. "Yes," I answered confidently. "These trees will be here for many generations to come because we learned how to protect them." That evening, sitting on my porch, watching the sunset paint the maple grove in golden light, I reflected on everything that had happened. Diana Cooper had seen only the minerals beneath the soil, never understanding the true value of what grew above it. Her greed had cost her everything, while our commitment to protecting the land had strengthened not just my farm, but our entire community. Jennifer stopped by with the final paperwork from the case. "You know," she said, looking out at the maple grove, "this story is going to be taught in law schools. It's a perfect example of how communities can stand up to corporate overreach and win." "It's not just about winning," I replied. "It's about protecting something important for the future." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared above the maple trees, I thought about my great-grandfather who had first worked this land. He couldn't have imagined the challenges we would face, but he had passed down something more valuable than any mineral deposit: the understanding that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The bridge that Diana Cooper had tried to build was never constructed, but something else had been built instead: a stronger community, better laws to protect family farms, and a deeper appreciation for the land that sustains us all. And so the maple farm continues, its trees standing tall against the sky, a testament to the enduring power of those who choose to protect what matters most. Diana Cooper's bridge may have failed, but the bridges we built between neighbors, between generations, and between people and the land they love, those will stand forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.